What's going on, and welcome to part 2 of my power rankings. Let's get right into it. At 17th place on my list are the Paris Eternal. Their roster is at main tank, Benbest and No Smite. At off tank, Hanbin and Smex. At flex support, Hip and Gray. At main support, Cruz and FD God. At DPS, Soon, Nico, Exi, and Sparkle. Let's address the elephant in the room, Sparkle and Hanbin both being underaged. Hanbin will be missing the first 2 games of the season, which would otherwise be winnable games against the Toronto Defiant and the London Spitfire. Sparkle, on the other hand, will be missing the first 16 games of the season. The strongest part of the Eternals roster will be available when more than half the season has already been played. Until then, the Eternal will have to play with a very bizarre mix of players. Smex will play the first 2 games before Hanbin is available, while Nico presumably will be filling Sparkle's shoes. The odd mix between average EU talent and element Mystic, paired with ineligibility of Hanbin and Sparkle, is the reason for the low spot on my list. Next up, occupying the 16th slot on my list, are the Hangzhou Spark. Their roster is at main tank, Guxue. At off tank, Ria and Sasin. At main support, IDK and Chinese newcomer Mika. At flex support, Bebe and another Chinese addition, Coldest. At DPS, Bazzi, Godsby, and Adora. This is a team that improved the longer a meta was locked in place, which is something we will certainly not see due to the hero pools being introduced shortly after the season starts. Although this team has great players, I have a feeling that the volatility of the meta along with constant travel will be too much for them to handle, thus falling to the bottom quarter of the standings. Next up, a fan favorite, the Toronto Defiant. Their roster is at main tank, Beast. At off tank, Nevix. At main support, Kellex and Roki. At flex support, Kariv. And at DPS, Surefour, Logix, Agilities, as well as Mangachu on a 2-way contract. There are questions all over this roster. How good are Beast and Nevix in reality? Who is going to start, Surefour or Logix? Was Boston pulling Kellex down? And many more. I think this roster just doesn't have enough firepower to compete with the best. With the power of friendship and teamwork, they might be able to get upsets here and there, but will still fall towards the bottom of the league. Coming in at 14th place are the Dallas Fuel. Their roster is at main tank, Gamsu and Trill. At off tank, Note. At main support, Closer and Harry Hook. At flex support, Unko and new addition Crimzo. At DPS, Decay, Doha, Zachary, and AKM. As one of the highest potential DPS duos in the entire league, Decay and Doha are in for a frustrating season. They are by far the strongest part of this roster. Note and Gamsu are more than a year past their synergistic prime, not to mention questions around Note's hero pool. An average at best tank line alongside a questionable support rotation doesn't seem like an ideal lineup, and for that reason they are this low in the rankings. Next up, at lucky number 13, are the London Spitfire. Their roster is at main tank, JMac and Jihoon. At off tank, Bernard and Cleston. At main support, Fuse and Sanguinar. At flex support, Hailey and Krillin. At DPS, Glister, Shui, Babel, and Aldo. This team is largely an unknown quantity. They have some great pieces in Glister, Shui, and Bernard, but the others are yet to prove themselves. I have relatively high expectations for this young team and expect them to be fighting for a play-in spot. Next up are the Chengdu Hunters. Their roster is at main tank, Ameng and Ating. At off tank, Late Young and Elsa. At main support, Yveltal and Lengsa. At flex support, Molly and Kyo. And at DPS, Bacon Jack, Jinmu, and Leave. Last season, this roster thrived on chaos and benefited heavily from the element of surprise. With hero pools on the horizon, chaos will be an element in most matches this season. Due to less prep time, individual skill will play a bigger part in a team's success. With players like Jinmu, Leave, and Ameng, this team will be fighting for a play-in spot. Rounding out the bottom 10 are the Florida Mayhem. Their roster is at main tank, Fate and Karayan, at off tank, Gargoyle, at main support, Chris, at flex support, Byram and Gangnamjin, and at DPS, Saya player, Yaki and BQB. Historically, the Mayhem have been the worst team in the league, but they've made enough upgrades this season to change that. Their tank line of Fate and Gargoyle is pretty solid. Their DPS Yaki and Saya player are extremely explosive. They also have one of the most promising flex supports in the entire Overwatch League in Gangnam Jin. The Florida Mayhem have done enough to elevate themselves into the mid-tier of teams, even adding top-tier talent in Gangnam Jin and Yaki. So don't expect the perpetually underperforming Florida of old. Thanks for watching part 2 of my power rankings. Part 3 coming soon. If you enjoyed the video, press like and subscribe.